So, dear students, in today's lecture, we are going to talk about the structure of synapses. We already have talked about nervous system, and we talked about its various aspects. We talked about the structure of neurons, the variety of neurons. We talked about resting membrane potential, action potential, structure of the membrane, which is involved in uh, production of these or generation and maintenance and actions of these membranes to create the potential and distribute the signals. Now the next thing is this, that how neurons are connected to each other, because we know that all of the neurons, which are of course in billions and trillions, have to connect to each other for all kinds of functioning of the nervous system. So let's talk about how neurons are connected. Answer is what we call synapses. So let's see what are the synapses. Now have a look on this diagram. Here's the structure of a large neuron in the brain, showing its important functional parts. This is inside the brain. This is the one which is there in the spinal cord, and these two are connected to each other. Now, there are many neurons which are connected with this single neuron. So in the brain, this is one which is connected. This is one neuron which is connected to many neurons in the spinal cord here. Here you can see the cell body, the dendrites, which are looking like a highly branched tree, and then the axon, and then if you go down, you can see the connections. We call them synapses, by which they are connected to the second order neurons which are there in the spinal cord. So this one is receiving various signals from some parts of the body on these dendrites on this cell body, and then they are making the orders and sending those orders to these neurons which are receiving these orders, and then going to the muscles or glands or other parts of the body to implement those orders, to send those orders. So let's talk about and elaborate on the so these connections where these two neurons, this one and these ones, are connected to each other are called actually synapses. So let's elaborate on these synapses. So here is one example. This is one neuron, which is, we can say, sending neuron, which is sending a signal to this neuron. This is in this case the receiving neuron, which is receiving a signal. Here you can see this one is producing an action potential in itself, then sending this potential through its axon to various dendrites of this receiving neuron. Here the end feet of this neuron are connected to the dendrites of this neuron. So it means we can also say that end feet of the sending neurons are connected to the dendrites on the receiving neuron. Here you can see, so nerve impulse is traveling in this direction, from sending to the receiving. Then it spreads in the dendrites here, and collected here in the cell body, and then moves along the cell body to reach the axon of this one, the receiving neuron, and then goes ahead to the next cells. Now let's elaborate more. The synaptic transmission. So what is synaptic transmission? Now synapses are there. Synapses are connections between the neurons. What is synaptic transmission? What does these synapses do? What they do? So synaptic transmission is two types. Electrical synapses or electrical synaptic transmission, chemical synaptic transmission, by electrical signals or by chemical signals. So electrical synapses are very closely connected channels between the two neurons. Again, as previously you have seen, this is the property of the cell membrane. Which structures the cell membrane do have? So if a membrane have to be electrically connected to the next, this is basically due to presence of the connected channels which are connected to each other very closely. It allows transmission of nerve impulse directly from one neuron to the other. And we know what is that nerve impulse? Basically the action potential, entry of sodium. It means the sodium ions can be transferred directly from one neuron to the next neuron. So that's why we call this electrical transmission. Now the chemical synapse. Okay, so second is chemical synapse. Now the chemical synapse are, of course, as the name says, the chemicals which are also called neurotransmitters because they are transmitting messages between the neurons. We call them neurotransmitters. So what are these? These are chemicals which are released at synapses. They are released from the presynaptic cell, and they are also called sending neuron, and then they go and attach to the membrane of the next neuron, which is also called the receiving neuron. So they are released from the sending neuron or the presynaptic neuron, and they attach on the membrane of the receiving neuron, or we can say the postsynaptic neuron. So presynaptic and postsynaptic, and then they are responsible for actions. Now let's elaborate on electrical synapses. Now, electrical synapses transfer impulse by direct ionic coupling. That is, ions will be transmitted from one neuron to the next neuron directly by connected ion channels. Now at electrical synapse, the plasma membrane of pre and postsynaptic cells are in close opposition. They're very close to each other, and the difference between, the space between them is just in few nanometers, and this is very small, and ions cannot escape from that space. So ions directly move from one cell to the other via that channel. They are not able to escape, so they are simply transmitted. Now the communication between cells takes place by way of protein channels called gap junctions. Sometimes we call them gap junctions. We'll see a diagram just coming ahead. So ions can flow from one cell to the other by way of these gap junctions to produce an equal, though somewhat attenuated, signal in the postsynaptic cell. Attenuated means slightly lessened. Here you can see an electron micrograph of connexons, which are the ion channels which are responsible for electrical transmission, looking like these small flowers. Let's have a closer look. If we take a small piece of that, then we'll see like this: membrane of the cell 1 or the sending neuron, membrane of the cell 2 or the receiving neuron, and here you can see that the ion channel in the uh, sending neuron and ion channel in the receiving neuron are very close to each other, very close. Very small nanometers difference among them. That's why ions from this side will be transmitted directly passing through this path which is made by we sometimes call it gap junction, and process and enter the cell 2. So from cell 1, ions can be directly transmitted through these channel and enter into the cell 2 to create an action potential, generate an action potential in this cell. So here, from here, cell 1, action potential or sending neuron, action potential is coming in the form of course, mostly sodium ions, and passes through this whole channel, the path, and enter cell 2, and then generate action potential over there too. So that's how message is done, and that is very fast. This happen in the central parts of the brain, the central nervous system, where fast, we can say like decision making or something, where fast action has to be taken place, and quick response is required. Electrical transmission of nerve impulse is found at many locations in various animals like retina, because eye have to see quickly. Retina inside the eye. Some locations of vertebrate nervous system, even in smooth muscles, because they also have to respond faster. Cardiac muscle fibers and many of the sensory neurons. Now, electrical transmission, something important about it, that this is possible in both directions, at gap junctions, but at some places it is unidirectional. If it is unidirectional, that is always from sending neuron towards the receiving neuron, this will be called, that kind of junction will be called rectifying junction. But at many places, this is possible in both directions. This is very clear from their structure, because here you can see that there is a path. Now, when this path is open, ions could be transmitted from this part to this cell, and of course, definitely, because path is open otherwise, so they could be transmitted from this part to this part. So back. So there could be backflow. There's a problem. This is a problem with this kind of transmission. That backflow is possible because if path is open, ions can move from this direction to this direction, of course, vice versa. I mean, they can go back. At some places, it is only unidirectional, and those are called the rectifying channels or rectifying junctions. Electrical transmission is quite faster than of chemical transmission. So it is the fastest form of transmission inside the nervous system. At some locations, both chemical and electrical transmission may occur. Like first it was discovered in birds that at some locations in the nervous system, they do have both kinds of transmission, both chemical and it means that these there are channels on the membrane which are connexons, gap junctions. There are more channels which are chemical channels. So both channels are possible. Now the chemical synapses. So chemical synapses they work with the help of a biomolecule which is called a neurotransmitter. So they help with the function of they help with the work of with the help of that neurotransmitter. So by the transmission in nervous system is possible by them. So these are simply biomolecules. These are different types of biomolecules which can act as a neurotransmitter. These could be proteins. These could be fatty molecule. Even these could be a gas like nitrous oxide, NO. You have heard of NO. Can also act as a transmitter. Even ATP can act as a transmitter in nervous system. You have heard of acetylcholine, gibberellin, GABA, gamma aminobutyric acid, and many more, serotonin, and so. So neurotransmitter is released in the synaptic cleft. Now have a look on the structure here. This is one end foot of the presynaptic neuron or the sending neuron, and this is quite closely connected to the dendrite of the receiving neuron or postsynaptic neuron. Now what happened that this neuron, the presynaptic neuron or the sending neuron, will release the neurotransmitter, this biomolecule, inside this cleft, this space which is there, and then the receiving neuron do have these receptor sites. These are different types of proteins, glycoproteins also, various structures, which have site to which these neurotransmitters can attach. So it means that neurotransmitter has to attach to the receptor site to act upon these cells. For example, when neurotransmitter comes and arrives and attaches to this receptor, in the receptor membrane, ion channels will open, and sodium, for example, if these are sodium channels, then a lot of sodium will rushes in, and this will generate an action potential inside the postsynaptic neuron. So message will be transmitted via this neurotransmitter. But the postsynaptic membrane has receptors. If there are no neurotransmitter, no action will take place. If there is no receptor, again no action will take place. So both of these things are required, like neurotransmitter and the receptor. So neurotransmitter is released in the synaptic cleft where the two neuron membranes are close together, but not as close as these are in the electrical synapses. So ions cannot flow directly from this. Neurotransmitters has to release and to attach to the receptor. So there is a delay, slows down, because first of all chemicals will be released in the cleft, move towards the receptor sites, attaches to the receptor site. When they attaches to the receptor, there are changes in the receptors which causes the changes in the ion channels or membrane structure somehow, and then the action will take place. So there will be a lot of delay in the transmission of the message. So chemical synapses are slower than electrical synapses. So neurotransmitters, they attaches to a receptor in the postsynaptic membrane and cause an action. So these will be slower than here is another example. For example, neurotransmitter is released, attaches to the receptor, which is itself an ion channel. It opens, and there is an entry of ions inside this postsynaptic neuron for transmission of the message. So this is about synapses, electrical and chemical. Review this lecture. If you have any questions, you can post these to the various forums. Thank you.